Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here with another episode of MetaPod, where I bring in thought leaders to talk about the three common challenges that manufacturers, industrial service organizations that have stuff they need to deal with: the forever labor shortage, digital transformation, digitization of work, and the conversation around AI and how do you get the ROI of AI. And of course, needing to do more with less resources, people, logistics, waste in our processes. And I'm really pleased to have Will Kraus with us here today. He's a new member of the Meta Experts ecosystem. He's got a great background in logistics. He'll talk about himself here in a moment. And the real topic here is going to be around, this notion of how do you know you're really getting the most out of your 3PLs? What are some of those questions you should be asking to identify and expose waste, prevent fraud outright, and spotting what the low value providers of logistics look like, but using AI tools inside of that to figure out how to do that. So this episode's for you if you tend to rely on third parties like 3PLs and forwarders to do well with you. Might suspect you're overpaying, if you will, and want to figure out how to use AI to improve decisions that we make as an organization, reduce our costs, manage our risk and potential damage to our freight and our goods. So with that, Will, tell us a little bit about you.
Thanks, Ron. I'm about 20 years in logistics overall, everything from truckload to LTL, parcel, ocean, air, cross-border, brokerages of all shapes and sizes, managed transportation, and freight tech most recently. I was very fortunate early in my career to get a healthy dose of lean. And that's discipline has helped me kind of see inside of the processes, right? How shipping decisions get made, where the waste lives, where complacency hides, where fraud might slip into that complacency, and where providers might really sound like they're adding value, but they're not really pulling their weight. I moved over to freight tech about 5 or so years ago. I gained a lot of solid experience on not just utilizing AI, but building agentic AI models. And that's been really clutch in removing that non-value added labor and putting AI to use in its best form.
All right. Well, you said something important there. Define for me what you mean by agentic AI models. And I'm not sure our audience is completely up to speed on what you mean by that.
Sure. Think of a process where you have human non-value added labor. Could be anything manual, having to check an invoice to make sure it's all completed, or it's routed correctly, or even taking the old stamp and putting a stamp on it and handwriting in your cost centers or whatever the old processes might be. Agentic AI is really a form and a function to remove that manual waste and automate it, but putting an intelligence layer in there that acts as that human set of eyes, so to speak. So that individual can be taken out of that non-value added labor process and put somewhere more beneficial.
Awesome. Thank you for defining that.
Sure.
So what we look for here in our podcast is to start out with three key areas, a diagnostic, if you will. We're speaking to an audience that doesn't have their background, so we have to assume they're novices. We need to be careful to define what we mean as we go. But in your experiences, what would be three critical areas you think any organization should be looking at? Why are we looking at those? What are the questions we should ask if we're going to walk down the hall and lean in and ask questions? How do we measure a baseline and understand the nature of the threat, the opportunity that faces the organization? What's the burning platform around these three critical things you would advocate we need to understand and look at?
I'd say number one would be waste. Identifying waste in your current logistics or even business processes. So AI is a bloodhound for finding that sort of inefficient tribal habit. Anything from bad routing logic to manual workflows to areas that automation might be able to improve a current process. And that's really where AI sort of shines. Second piece would be what we spoke about earlier is those low value 3PL and carrier relationships. And what I mean by that is who's adding value and who's simply not. Where is the ROI? If you have all of your share of wallet in one or two 3PLs or carriers, what are they bringing from a value added standpoint on top of just a transactional relationship? The third really big component would be using AI to expose where fraud might live in your existing processes. AI is that bloodhound. It's excellent at weak verification, bad oversight, bad broken process discipline. Those would be the big three for me.
All right. So let's go back through those one at a time now and help our audience understand what are the questions we're asking. How do we diagnose we have a challenge, right? So we're not getting to how to fix it just yet. We're really focusing in on how to know what to ask for, what you're looking for to uncover if you actually have something you need to do about these three challenges. So we can just go right back to the very first one around, exposing waste in your logistics processes. How do you get to the bottom of understanding how big or bad that problem is?
A lot of companies are still making their business decisions based on habit, tribal information, not analysis or baseline information. It's the same mode, it's the same provider, it's the same service level. It's the way we were trained to do it. It's the way we've always done it, right? And that's pretty common in change management as far as a response goes. But if you don't have anybody disrupting the status quo, if you don't have anyone breaking down the processes and questioning the why are we doing this way? Does this still even make sense? And looking for those improvements in all those different areas, it could be a considerable gap. It's one that AI can really help you uncover and improve.
So what's the data? I mean, what's the physical evidence that I should be looking for if I'm going to go down and determine whether we have a gap here? How do I measure that? How do I get a baseline? How do I say, hey, this is the way we're performing today and we should be performing differently in the future? Do you have anything to share around that?
As far as a baseline goes, it could really start anywhere. You can start looking at, why freight moves a specific way. If you can't answer that question, that's really the first red flag. If it's just, this is the way we've always done it, there's probably a whole lot more that lives under there than you realized. And those are the areas that, a non-technical shipper can utilize AI to kind of cross-check with what's a good idea, what's the industry going standard, or answer your questions as to why it's probably not the best fit for this particular operation or this particular mode. Really depends upon the shipper's sort of level of familiarity with their operations and what they're looking to improve.
Right. So a question we might ask as the novice is, where's the baseline? What's the last time we went in and gut checked all of our assumptions against current best practices in terms of that decision making? And typically when you do that analysis, well, assuming that it's a worst case scenario, we have been stuck doing the same thing for the last couple year or two. How much delta would you typically expect to find in terms of percentage opportunity?
Could be considerable depending on what you're looking at. AI can be used to uncover wrong mode selection, unnecessary expedited shipping, missing consolidation points, poor shipment timing, manual waste process. I mean, all those self-inflicted freight costs. It really could be as simple as, are you paying a fair market rate for what you're being given for a shipment, all in rate, so to speak? Is what you're being delivered as far as a final cost really competitive with the market? AI can help you really gauge that and understand where you're at relatively easily. You don't need a degree
Yeah.
in
So let me ask my question
AI.
differently. I didn't get the answer I was after. So let me ask it differently. In your experience, when you do that analysis, what percentage difference in the cost? In other words, is there a 3% difference in cost? Is there a 50% difference in cost in your typical experience if we've been business as usual, doing it the way doing it the way we've always done it, and now we've done this analysis? How much gap do you typically find between what and what?
It's significant. A lot of times when AI can figure out what the market rate is versus what you're paying, you find that you've been paying sometimes 30, 50% more just
Yikes.
because just because you didn't realize what that market rate was. You were just told you've got a really great rate with us. You've got our carrier preferential rate. When in reality, you're unfortunately just padding a broker's margin. In an area like mode optimization, it could be even more. It could be, 30 to 60% if you're looking at the difference between a partial truckload shipment and an LTL shipment. I mean, these are really complex mode differences that the novice shipper might not even realize are available.
All right,
I can
cool.
really bring those to light.
All right, cool. So let's move on to your second diagnostic around this notion of are our logistics provider providing real value, right? Or just moving freight and marking it up. What are we diagnosing? What are we looking for there? How do we baseline that and identify the nature of the gap or the opportunity?
Sure. It really goes back to who's just moving the freight and collecting whatever margin they can squeeze out versus I have, 2/3 of my share of wallet in one organization. From a 3PL standpoint, what value are they adding other than or on top of just that transactional relationship? AI can really help you uncover legacy rates that don't track and trend with the market, especially now with the market variables going up and down almost overnight. Added accessorials, right? And what is it?
Wait,
Detention
you just said a fancy word there. What's an accessorial? What's that mean?
accessorials, right? So anytime you're dealing with any type of shipping, parcel, truckload, LTL, accessorials are kind of above and beyond. Think of them as like the a la carte, Ruth Chris kind of additional items on the menu. You could have a detention issue where the carrier had to wait to be unloaded. After a certain amount of time, the clock starts to run. Those accessorials are standard typically across the industry. However, brokers and 3PLs can add margin in those areas. If you don't know the difference, you'll be paying a whole lot more when you annualize that type of a number.
All right. So I'm the novice, right? I want to understand the nature of the gap. What am I looking for? What kind of evidence am I seeking? How do I measure that? And again, what's the delta? If you haven't been looking at it and really examining it,
Yeah.
once you do, what do you typically find is, an opportunity there?
Usually it boils down to when the quote doesn't match the invoice. That's usually a
Okay.
big red flag there. And where you see those inconsistencies, the gaps can be considerable. When there's a little bit of a weakness in that area and not validating those two numbers, you can start to see them sway in the wrong direction pretty quickly. Where they can get away with it, they often press pretty firm.
All right. So I could figure that one out. What was the quote? What did we pay? So now I could do that, right? That part I'm smart enough to figure out without a lot of help is what were the quotes? What did we pay? And what's the delta? If that's like the very first thing you go look at and say, can we identify there's a gap? And obviously that gives you an idea of how to measure that. Say, is it a 2% delta? Is it a 50% delta? So that's a good start.
Right.
And then I want you to also expand a bit on when you talk about providing value add services, right? Are they providing real value? What do you mean by that? What am I looking for to determine if they're doing that?
Do they understand my business? Do they know why we move the freight the way we move the freight? Do they understand all the upstream processes that go from staging, from order to cash? All those variables really equate to the transportation solution that gets presented. If it's strictly a transactional relationship, then it's strictly transactional. There really isn't any value being added. There's no real carrot on the end of the stick, so to speak. And those can be pretty easy to diagnose most of the time.
So that was really good. Again, I'm the novice. How do I measure that? I mean, I'm walking down the hall, I'm leaning in, I need to ask a question to determine if we have a gap here. What am I fishing for when I ask those questions? What am I looking for?
Any opportunity to demonstrate the value that's being provided. So if I have the majority of my shipping spend in one 3PL, are they scorecarding the carriers according to their KPI metrics, on time delivery performance, right? Any type of exception or breakdown or driver issue? How is my rate compared to my competitors, right? What's the market rate look like? Can you show it to me? Is it easy for me to get my hands on? Can I actually see a trend line of where my spend is versus the guy across the street, or what the market might look like in an industry that's similar to mine? Any type of variable where I know what I'm paying versus what everyone else is paying and how well my carriers inside of that spend are performing.
That was awesome. Exactly what I was looking to hear. Have you ever tried, I'm going off topic here a bit. Have you ever had success with some form of a Kaizen activity where basically it's a structured inquiry where you're basically reaching out to that 3PL provider and saying, look, we need to put our heads together and talk about A, what are we doing and why we're doing it? And B, most importantly, what could we be doing differently or better to get better use out of you or our other spend? Have you tried that as a technique and what happened?
Actually, that was a technique that was sort of foundational at one of the companies that I worked at in my past. You needed to have that lean understanding and that lean certification. For that very reason, you were doing strategic procurement on behalf of your shippers. So it wasn't good enough just to take the data and say, here, you know, bring me tariffs based on this spend. You had to understand conceptually the order to cash flow, the buying behaviors, why they need these options and also these options as well. Even though they cost more, they want to be able to deliver that level of service when this goes wrong. Those types of variables can only really be routed and understood by taking that Kaizen approach, by going through the system and value stream mapping, what works, what doesn't work, and how can we build a solution that creates the impact they're looking for. Very shipper centric.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. I did a project a few years back with an international 3PL that was basically working with with an automotive OEM. And they were basically the OEM had basically done a business process outsourcing to them to basically handle getting parts being made in Mexico to a consolidation center south of the border, into a consolidation center in the United States, then on to the assembly plant sequence just in time for, line side assembly operations, right? So that had all been outsourced to them. And it was quite a project to go through and basically value stream map and create an activity-based costing model of, the frequency, the velocity, and then what is it really costing at the step level across that entire process. And you want to talk about some eye openers, right? And all the hidden factory things that, well, it's supposed to be step ABC, but it's really ABC X 12, X number 12 and 43 because of all these conditional things that happen.
Yep.
I imagine that's exactly what you guys were doing in some form.
It is. And the value stream mapping process in general can often take that approach where you think it's 6 or 7 post-its on a wall and it ends up being 200 in various different directions.
All right, cool. So let's unpack that third diagnostic around how we can use AI to look for fraud, right? So again, it's a diagnostic. We're not telling people how to do it just yet or how to fix it, but really it's how do I ask the questions? How do I determine if we have an opportunity or a threat around the fraud side of it?
Fraud right now is an epidemic, so to speak. Ever since COVID, fraud's up about 1,500%, mainly living inside of the truckload brokerage operations because a lot of them are very manual. And anytime you have tribal knowledge, when one person's vacation or sick day turns your entire operation into a lockdown, you have the opportunity for freight to thrive, or for fraud to really take root and thrive.
All right. I'll bet you've got a story you could tell about this, maybe related to some kind of spirits kind of organization. Could tell us a story about what you uncovered and how that, and how that uncovered and the nature of the opportunity or threat that presented.
Guy Fieri, the diners, drive-ins, and dives food celebrity chef, he started a private label tequila operation, and they had very high-end tequila. They had 2 full truckloads that were stolen, 25,000 bottles total. And it wasn't what you would think. It wasn't the Goodfellas strong-armed robbery that they hijacked the trucks under. It wasn't that at all. Right now, freight lives in a very different, for freight fraud lives in a very different form. Guy Fieri's operation used a 3PL for the majority of their shipping. That 3PL in turn used another carrier for that particular move. And that particular carrier double brokered or unauthorized, used another carrier as if it were themselves. And that carrier that they double brokered to wasn't just a normal, regular truckload carrier. It was a phony MC number built purpose specific to hijack those two trucks. And the level of
Wait, whoa. Let's see if I heard that correctly. So the Shadow Logistics Organization was formed specifically to steal that tequila?
yes, that's the level.
Oh,
Yep, that's the level of clever that this has really turned out to be. Fake carrier chains, fake documents, fake delay messages, spoofed GPS coordinates. The cargo was diverted intentionally. And what looked like a common problem, maybe a diversion with good cause, was really the whole purpose of stealing those two truckloads in the first place. And by the time they realized they were gone, it had been days past. They were long, long gone. And those are the types of fraud that really tribal knowledge often doesn't really route out well enough. You have to have somebody live in the process that kind of has that gut feeling that says something doesn't seem right here. And where AI can come in and make the difference is sometimes it's just as simple as snapping a picture of a BOL and uploading it to ChatGPT.
you said another jargon. A who? A what? What was that again? You get a snap
BOL.
picture. DOO? Did you say DOO?
BOL affiliating. So whatever that
All right.
3PL is providing you to slap on that pallet before pickup, taking a look at those MC numbers or even snapping a picture of it and just firing it off to ChatGPT to say, hey, does everything look right on this one? The AI is built now just right off the shelf with no certifications and no advanced knowledge to capture that MC number and go, this isn't a real MC number. This is a problem. You need to validate this and verify it immediately before pickup. Something like that could have changed the game, at least for the 25,000 bottles of tequila anyways.
All right, cool. So let's pretend I'm sitting on the board of directors and I've heard this podcast and I'm like, geez, I wonder if we've got exposure there. Let's pretend you and I linked arms, right? And we're going to walk down to the logistics department. What exactly are we going to ask them to determine if they're on top of this problem or not? What are we asking them? What are we looking for? What's the evidence I want to lay my eyes on to say, yep, you understand this issue, you've got your arms around it, or you don't have a clue, right? Tell me what those questions are we would ask. What would we look to examine?
How are we vetting and processing all of our operations as they come through, right? Where are the potential gaps and the leaks in the process? Is it really outlined and drawn out? Can you look at a swim lane and understand everything that comes in from order entry to what happens next to the validation steps? Who's checking to see the carrier's legit? Is that on us? Is that on the 3PL? If it isn't on us, how's the 3PL doing that? What automated processes are in place to make sure it's not travel and it's automatic? Those platforms are out there, but they're not as common as people might think. A lot of those legacy workflows are still alive and well, and that's why fraud is increasing. The rate's increasing.
All right. Well, really done a really good job of, defining these three critical areas we should look at. And to some extent, you told us what to do about it, but mainly we were trying to focus on how to just uncover the nature, the scope of threat or opportunity to us. So let's pivot back to those now and go back through them and say, okay, we listened to this, we went and we looked and we're like, we do have a problem, right? Where we have a gap, there's savings opportunities, there's risks. Our 3PLs are really not performing. Let's go back through those now and talk about what do you do, right? Starting with your advice around, how you that first diagnostic, we go back to that for a second, is around assisting the shippers to expose waste in the logistics processes. Let's assume we uncovered, said, yep, we got a problem. Now what do we do?
You can really start with the shipping patterns you repeat the most and challenge them, diagnose them one at a time. Don't try to fix the whole nuts and bolts all at one time, not the whole network at once. But look at the freight you move most often and ask the simple questions. What are our delivery commitments here? Should this be going LTL, or is partial truckload a better move for us? What about full truckload? Does that make more sense in this particular move? Should this go air? Should this go ground? What service commitments do we have for this? Is this really necessary, or are we overpaying already on a service we don't really need in this particular area? Are we creating extra costs by shipping too early or too late? These can be rough and often better as a simple, open conversation with AI.
So tell me more about this open conversation with AI. I'm going to preface this. We're going off topic a little bit. What I'm learning, Will, as I continue to attempt to catch up with the world around AI is that there's two major things that seem to be emerging. As one, we as an organization, we have to become extremely skillful at asking the right questions for AI to do solutioning for us. In other words, the old Einsteinian formulation of the problem is often more essential than the solution, right? So that's one critical component. So it's the organizational skills around knowing what to ask. And then the second part is AI is only as good as the data and the quality of the data, the timeliness of that data, which is a big challenge with some AI platforms if they're working with really old data that makes bad assumptions. So tell me a little bit more about how do you go ask that question, right? To get to the bottom of that.
I have actually a great story that might work for this one.
Please, please.
Worked with a family-run chemical distributor locally in the area. Dry bulk recurring 10 pallet shipment every 3 or 4 days. It's just a gnarlier shipment that they're paying a lot for, and it was a consistent kind of topic of interest. The owner's son actually put ChatGPT on his phone and has been pushing his dad to use it more and more. Dad was reluctant. The owner really didn't see the value in it. One day he's traveling home from work, about 20-minute drive home, decides, you know what, I'll give this a shot. What do I got to lose? This thing isn't going to work for me anyways. Presses the conversation button while he's driving, which allows you to talk, openly with AI back and forth. Just simply ask the question. We have this shipment. It's 10 pallet dry bulk chemical shipment, moving an LTL. Here's what we're paying every single time. Is this the best possible way for us to do this? And if it isn't, or you need more information, ask me some questions to get to the bottom of this. And this is all during a 20-minute drive home. What AI was able to find just through the simple back and forth in the first 5 minutes was that mode optimization was the missing component, and that LTL wasn't the best option. Partial truckload was, because they don't have a lot of depth in logistics, as most shippers don't. Partial truckload was, what's that? That's an option? How does that work? And now we have a much more productive conversation going on. And by the time he pulls in the driveway, he realizes we just saved 45% every single time we're moving that freight by changing the mode. That's just the beginning of that entire kind of consultative relationship that AI can start to shine a light on, and then maybe engage somebody like me to bring the rest of the pieces home.
Okay, that was awesome. And that correlates with my experiences is, asking good questions, but then sitting back and listening to those questions and tell me more, what else, right? And unpacking everything that we should consider before we ask the real question. Who should I source it with, right? It's just basically helping understand everything. And that's, in my mind, this is a critical organizational skill that organizations need to embrace. It's kind of back to, does AI replace people, take people's jobs? The answer is no. People with AI skills will take your job.
That's exactly right.
So that was a really good. So let's move on now to that second area you're getting the diagnostic on. If logistics values are not clearly showing value, what do we do to bring that in line?
I would say measuring providers on results, not just how quickly they respond. Right? A lot of companies keep a broker or a 3PL on board because they answer the phone quickly, and well, it's just the way we've always done it. We've always called this number to get the quote, and we just go with that. That's not good enough anymore. Look at whether they're improving the rates, whether they're reducing accessorials that are unique to your operation. Are they helping you with mode decisions, like we just talked about with mode optimization, and understanding or taking the time to understand how you're doing your business? And this doesn't have to be a 1 hour conversation. It's just the right open-ended questions to get the right information so that broker can take more of a consultative approach to the solutions that they're providing you, not maybe selecting the best solution that pads their margin and improves their commissions.
Cool. Anything else on this one before we move on to the third area? Anything else on this one?
A lot of those value adds come from some of the things we spoke about earlier, improving invoice accuracy when you're noticing those defects and you're getting responsive replies as to fixing them in a path to correcting them. Supporting the compliance that prevents fraud is another huge component of it. Having those types of questions with your 3PL provider, before you need to go to AI to figure them out, is ideally what you want to be doing. But in certain cases, the AI can bridge the gap there.
All right, awesome. And let's move on to that third area around fraud, the risk of fraud, et cetera. Let's assume, we think we've got an opportunity to improve here. We have exposure. What do we do to close the gap on that?
Let's say not relying on one particular process check or one email or one person's tribal knowledge to be the fraud sniff check or detector. It's all about layered validation, right? Cross-checking the carrier's identity with the carrier authority, the contract details, the banking instructions, the pickup information. You got to remember, fraudsters use AI too. They're using for why, right? So when you don't have that as a layer, you're often having to look down a million rabbit holes. But the goal here, the golden rule, if it doesn't feel right or doesn't smell right, you need to be strong enough to stand up and call it out. Because 9 times out of 10, you're onto something.
So who should we be empowering in the organization to do that? And what's the process to do that?
Anyone that has any hand in that shipment process whatsoever. Could be from the beginning when the quote comes through and the discussions had with the broker, or when the actual physical bill of lading documents and the load tenders start to come in. Not just sniff checking, but taking the time, if you don't have those automated systems and processes in place for AI to do the automatic scanning, take the time to really scrutinize what you're looking at. Understand what doesn't quite look right. I've never seen that over there before. That's unusual. Those are the key indicators to get you to where you need to go and kind of pull the fraud alarm before you pick up the freight.
So who is it typically you want to skill up in an organization to do that critical thinking? What's the process for that?
Would be more your frontline logistics coordinators,
Okay.
your logistics managers, your people who are responsible for not only setting up the shipment, but actually meeting the carrier on the ground, watching the freight go into the truck. Just simple eyesight recognition. And is the MC number and the name on the side of the truck the same as what you got on the BOL? Often it's that simple, right? But in the busy world of logistics, those things can be missed very easily.
Oh. So it's almost like we have an AI camera watching the trucks backing into the bays to say, does that correlate with that
That's
or
come
not? And if it doesn't, saying hello.
just a matter of time. And I'm sure that's on the way.
Yeah, I heard an interesting story on another guest on my podcast that maybe no, it's one of our it's one of our commercial partners. They were telling a story about AI cameras that watch people in the workplace, and when they start to do something that's unsafe, like standing on a box to get something, not locking out a machine before they lean into it, that it actually red flags that to management to get their fanning out there like really quick and see what the heck's going on, right? Because the goal is to reduce their exposure to workers' comp costs, right, and reduced accident rates. So it's kind of cool because it's not Big Brother in terms of it being properly done. It's not Big Brother saying, "Oh, we're watching every move so we can prosecute you." No, it's mom and dad looking over your shoulder saying, "Wait a minute, before you before you do that, maybe you want to turn the power off. And
May cause problems.
right. So it's a teaching and a coaching opportunity, right? To go out and say, okay, our process broke down. That's on me as leaders. We haven't trained, provided good processes. What do we learn from that? Right. And use that as a teaching moment as opposed to a punishing moment.
I agree. Yep. Should work alongside you and not out in front of you. And those are all good things to qualify your logistics provider with. Asking those types of questions is what will get you to the value.
That is awesome. Will, any other sage advice before we move into wrap up?
That's pretty much all I have, Ron.
Well, you did a great job. You did a great job. So Will, let's pretend that we have folks in our audience that got some ideas here. They want to get in touch with you to unpack this conversation more deeply.
Sure.
How do they get in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch with me would be to get in touch with you.
Awesome. Awesome. So let me know if you want to talk to Will, and I'll orchestrate that. And obviously, you can try to track him down on LinkedIn as well, but we'd let you guys do that. So with that, we're going to wrap up here. I want to thank our audience for joining us and ask, if you like this podcast, please like it. Please share with others. We have had some measured success with providing some thought leadership out there that people seem to appreciate. So be sure to, connect with us, be a follower, and we really appreciate your time joining us for this podcast. Thanks again, Will.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.